Hello and welcome back to the Lee's Summit Town Hall podcast. I am your host, Nick Parker. Before we get started on this week's episode, a quick reminder that this podcast is brought to the good people of Lee's Summit by our friends at Budget Blinds of Lee's Summit.
Budget Blinds!
Hey, Jason's back. Budget Blinds is your home for enlightened style shades. It's also your home for pretty much most of your home decor needs. If you want to make your home a little spicier, a little more awesome, this is the place to go check out, especially if you want to install those smart shades. Jason, I think we've talked about this before.
Once or 100 times.
It's the place where you get your robot shades.
You get your all hail.
All hail our robot shade overlords. Man, it's been a while since we've said that. But if you are ready to make your home a smart home, an awesome home, go see our friends at Budget Blinds. They're right in the heart of downtown. Tell them Nick sent you. All right, Jason's back. It's April. You're back. You know what that means? We're going to talk a little news stuff.
I mean, it's technically April Fool's, so this could be a giant joke for everybody in the listening community.
I'm faking this whole thing. No, Jason, you're back because I want to talk a little bit. Today, we're going to get to it in a second, kind of a final little election preview. Take a look at our candidates for the Board of Education. We're going to take a little look at the bond issue that's on the ballot as well. But before we do that, we're recording this on Tuesday night, April 1st, as you mentioned. There's a little news today, Jason. For those of us living on the Jackson County side of things, I know there's a few people over there all across the county line, but Jackson County, there was a little news concerning the worst topic of the last, 2 years, 3 years? Our property tax assessments. And really, I'm just going to sum it up. Let me handle this.
Okay.
What happened today was they announced that things might change, might get a little better for you, but nothing's really happened, so we just have to wait.
I mean, that's a very vague but not inaccurate summary of what happened as a whole.
So here's Jason. Here's the headlines. Really, let's just do the headlines. The county court ruled that, yes, the county does have to roll back and cap those increases at 15%. Now, what that means and what will change, we don't know.
Right. Okay. So I'll go a little bit farther back. So you go back all the way back to August of 2024, if you can remember back that far.
August is a good month.
The State Tax Commission, under essentially in parallel with the lawsuit from the Attorney General and all the politics and all the yapping and what have you, ruled that the county violated the law and how they appraised houses or assessed and appraised houses in the county, and ordered them to do this cap and rollback of any taxes or any houses that increased over 15% from their prior assessment in the way that goes. County didn't like that. You'll be shocked to know that the county didn't like that approval, and so they filed a lawsuit against the State Tax Commission, which today got I believe a 38-page order from the county judge, ordering them.
That is a lot of lawyer talk.
Right, upholding the findings of the State Tax Commission. Essentially, what that means now is that if the county does nothing, they would have to figure out some way to roll back those taxes and deal with that. To be clear, not the judge's order, nor anything from the Attorney General or anybody on the county legislature who's in favor of this ruling, or the ones, for that matter, who are not in favor of the rulings, have proposed any kind of process where that would happen. And it's extremely likely that the county will appeal this up to the Western District Missouri Court of Appeals, and possibly then all the way up to the Missouri Supreme Court in the future. So in short, this is not going anywhere just yet. And even if it does, nobody really knows what it's going to look like.
Right. What is the timeline there, Jason? When does the appeal process, like when does that get before a judge again?
Question mark shrug emoji is probably the right answer. It depends on I suspect, since this is something that's going to affect property tax rolls, and the longer it's delayed, the more sort of prejudice the taxpayers get with, having to continue to pay higher property taxes. I suspect it'll get expedited through the Court of Appeals relatively quickly, but that still is probably on the order of months, not like days or weeks. But there hasn't been anything published. Heck, they haven't even filed, since it was just done today. They have some time to file a notice of appeal and do all that, and they haven't done any of those things yet either. So we don't know a lot. I think the biggest thing to keep in mind is like assuming for a moment that the county is going to have to do some sort of rollback in some fashion. Like they're going to have to do some of that. The question then becomes, how are they going to do it in a way, and think about its impact on tax holders. And we'll use a couple of local examples here for you. Number one is like the city of Lee Summit. So the city of Lee Summit does property taxes, collects some level of property taxes every year, and they have to declare to the county in advance what they think their number is going to be, what their levy number is going to be for the upcoming years based on the assessments that they have in hand. Well, if all of a sudden those assessments drop by 15 or 20%, and that's probably a very conservative estimate of what we would be talking about here, they're either going to have to keep their levy rate really high and make people mad, or they're not going to have money. They're going to have a cash flow problem for that. And that's the city. Now, a lot of the city's revenue is generated through sales taxes and other things, so they've got a much more diversified base.
That is not the case.
That's not the case.
If you use the example of the school district.
Right. The school district, remember, the vast, vast majority of LSR7s or Blue Springs or any other public school districts funding, at least in the state of Missouri, comes from property tax levies, and they are the single largest levy of any of the levies for your home property taxes that you pay every year. So that's a question. So it can have a huge, huge impact on the operations or the ability of the district to manage their budgets on a year-to-year basis.
There is, and I'm actually surprising you probably with this question, so you're not prepared for it. I sort of apologize to you. We've seen something similar to this in a neighboring county. I think this happened over in Wyandotte County recently. How did that county? Do you know how they kind of solved that issue? I think they did credits.
I think they did some credits, and I mean the answer.
I mean, really, I guess just as a comparison, what are things that we could? We might see happen. You could see
any number of possibilities. You could see credits. And then, of course, all of this would probably get litigated as well, because whatever the county, like if the county is forced to come up with a solution, they're going to come up with a solution that sort of minimizes the impact on them. And I think probably in the end would minimize a lot of the impact on that. But then you may see a lot of lawsuits from, once again, the Attorney General, State Tax Commission, residents who want to get a check back for their taxes that they paid, or any number of other groups of those sorts of nature where they may want to do that. And so that even that may get wrapped up in litigation in that. And the answer is, how did the KCK Public Schools handle it? Not great, but none of the politics over there works really smoothly.
And that was probably a little bit of an unfair question, but I'm just as I think as people look to see what might happen, it's kind of nice sometimes to look at neighboring communities.
Right. I think you could anticipate that the county's answer at first will probably not give you money back directly. It may. I
think that's a fair assumption.
It probably will It might freeze your assessments or cap future assessments with a credit against some years. There may be some multi-year workout sort of thing, and nobody's going to like that, and there'll be lawsuits about it, and then eventually something will happen at the end that will make everybody appropriately unhappy, like all good compromises.
Okay, now that we've had the fun. The positive news.
Now we're going to just segue quite naturally.
Hey, actually, great segue, because you just brought up the school district and that impact. So now let's move over to the school district. The only thing on the ballot next week, Tuesday, is Election Day. For those of you that are leaving town during the LSR7 spring break, I hope that you did absentee.
Yeah, otherwise you're going to be
you're going to miss.
You're going to be in the 87% who didn't vote on this.
Hey, look, so here's what's on the ballot. Let's review that one more time. On the ballot is a $225 million bond issue for the school district. Also, we are voting on there are 4 candidates vying for 2 seats on the Lee Summit R7 Board of Education. We'll get to the Board of Education part next, but let's start with Jason. Just a real quick kind of review of what the district is trying to do if this passes.
Right. So the first thing they're going to do is some significant updates, actually new schools.
That's
for
right.
Greenwood Elementary and Hazel Grove. The Greenwood, they already have a plot of land for.
Yeah, near Hit Park. They've already purchased that land.
Right.
So they know where it's going.
And Hazel Grove is to be determined.
Well, if you listen to last week's episode of this with Dr. David Buck, the superintendent, and Dr. Steve Shelton, the associate superintendent. I tried to get him to leak out a little bit of where, but he wasn't falling for my bad tricks.
They're not going to tell you where they're trying to buy the land,
but they are vetting a few multiple. I don't know what am I talking about here? Yeah. A few sites that they are looking at. So if you want to go listen to that one, that's one of the things they get into. Since we're talking about elementary schools, I think it's good, Jason, that we bring up this vote has absolutely nothing to do with what the district may or may not do with Lee Summit Elementary in downtown.
Right. And so what they put in their educational materials, I believe that's what they have to call them, educational materials, is that a resolution, which is, binding on the board, but sort of semi-binding in the overall scheme of things, to hold some of the bond dollars for additional improvements pending the outcome, quote, of specific engagement regarding the future of Lee Summit and Westview Elementaries, which means that they're going to leave money aside to do something, but they've got to do a lot more talking in public work before they can get to the something.
Right. And so that's a whole separate issue. So for anyone thinking that a vote yay or nay is going to affect what happens to Lee Summit Elementary here in the downtown area, it does not.
Yes, and as it turns out, there's some strong feelings about that.
There are strong feelings to change.
All right, so in addition to that, there's some accessibility and security things kind of sprinkled all over the district, but really focused at Pleasant Lee and Miller Park, and then some sports stuff.
I mean, really, you make it sound so small.
There's some sports stuff.
I think one of the interesting conversations we had with Dr. Buck was really that big focus on what's happening with Pleasant Lee Middle School. It's an old school. They're going to add a whole section, a whole pod for the 6th grade students, which, remember, based on another election a few years ago, we now have 6th grade in our middle schools here. So they're going to do a whole section for 6th graders and then do some work to change the traffic flow, which is a big safety issue.
Yeah, because they got the 2 schools and that one road, and it's a mess.
It's a whole thing.
It's a whole mess over there. And then they're going to upgrade Lee Summit North and West baseball and softball fields to be of a similar standard to the new shiny one that got built over by East Trails and some other, turf fields and other things.
I'm glad that they're doing that. I was relatively new to Lee Summit when they built the district activities complex, when it was just, both Lee Summit and Lee Summit North high schools played everything over behind Lee Summit North at the district activities complex. I'm glad they moved pretty fast back to each school has its own facilities and has great facilities.
Right. And in the overall scheme of things, they keep arms racing themselves, right? Because just a few years they built this new, because Lee Summit had a very substandard by comparison to the other 2 schools, baseball and softball field program. And so they built these new sort of top of the state of the art at the time things. And then all of a sudden you'll be shocked to know that the parents of the baseball and softball students at North and West all of a sudden said, hey, wait a minute, why don't we have all the new shinies too? And here we are.
It's always interesting to hear how the district plans those and their future planning and how they space these things out. Like they know what they're going for, but sometimes you gotta listen to us crazy parents, right?
Yep. It doesn't matter what you do, whatever you cover, you're not covering my kid or my school or my sport. That's the way that goes.
So that's the biggest thing. It really, I think, other than planning for the growth and how and where our city is growing, and then really those accessibility and safety issues, like one of the big things he talked about really by replacing Greenwood and Hazel Grove is accessibility. Like if you are a wheelchair student, you have to be pushed around outside and through the entire school just to get to any room.
Yeah,
and so they've got to make.
They have They have the dates of those buildings, right? The Greenwood Elementary building was built in 1910, and I know a lot of people down there have a lot of love and strong feelings for that building, but that's not enough for a modern.
Not to mention it's on a pretty well used highway.
Yeah, there's
with
that.
Trucks going back and forth from a quarry.
And Hazel Grove was is a relative comparatively young building being built in 1940. So when those are done, then Lee Summit Elementary will be the oldest active elementary school building again. as it was when it was first built many years ago. So
that really, I think if you want to go listen to last week's episode, it's a great breakdown, a great conversation with Dr. Buck and Dr. Shelton, really digging into the details of what's in the bond issue. You can also go to the school district's website if you want to look at more at that. But that's a quick look at what's on the bond issue. Jason, let's get into what most people are focusing on, and that's the 4 candidates going for the Board of Education. Sorry. We have Michelle Dawson, Jennifer Foley, Nikki Nickens, and Leon Weatherby, all going for 2 seats. There's one incumbent.
I'm assuming that's how you personally rank them and not any other sort of ordering that you put forth.
I went for alphabetical, the old standby.
Okay.
The old standby. I went for alphabetical.
Sure. You're playing favorites. I know.
Jennifer Foley is the lone incumbent in that she is the current board president. And this is an interesting note. The last 2 board presidents have lost their races for re-election immediately after taking the seat as president.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a poison chalice.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's fair to say that our electorate has been pretty reactionary lately. Not a lot of incumbents have won the last several years when it comes to our Board of Education. So that's just an interesting thing to watch. But I don't want to get into that.
Right, and I think that there's something to be said for that I think, well, and it's not even that like the whole community swings one direction or another. I think it's, like and we're going to get into this anyway a little bit, right? There are sides in this election. There are sides, and that's you and I have talked about this a lot since we started this. By the way, 9 years ago, that's grown more and more into our local elections, which I don't necessarily like. And I think also it's a lot of there are a lot of issues that may should or shouldn't be actual issues that we're discussing, or maybe shouldn't be the top issues all the time, but that just get people stirred up, and that tends to be what they vote on. Right.
What we usually do, we send Q&As out to all of the candidates. We allow them a little chance to talk about their priorities and the issues facing the district. It's pretty standard. We didn't do any interviews with the candidates again this year. We've talked about that enough about why. But it was interesting. We had responses from all 4, and I think what I want to do now, Jason, is how do we differentiate? Because here's the thing: every candidate for the Board of Education says they're going to support the bond issue. Every single one of them. Every candidate every time says, "I'm here for the teachers. I want to support the teachers." Right?
Yep.
Every candidate says communication is a priority. We need to better communicate with our constituents. But what we want to do is dig a little deeper. What we're really looking for is what differentiates. So as we look at these Q&As, they are available still at Link to Lee Summit's website, linktoleesummit.com. What stands out? What are some things, Jason, that help us start to differentiate between the 4 so that people could choose who they want?
Right. I'd say the first thing you want to do is when you go and read them, and you should definitely go to linktoleesummit.com and click on that and read these in capacity, taking a lot of time to scroll through very carefully to make sure that you maximize the ad revenue that the business gets. No, I'm just kidding. But you should read them.
It's almost like I pay you to support my website.
I wish you did. But you should read them, but you shouldn't just read them just because. You should read them with purpose. And I think the purpose you should do is to think about what are those differentiations between them, and how, and you may have to do a little bit of guessing to figure out what those differences mean a little bit. And so I'll start here. I
think you're right. I think, everybody, and we do this naturally anyway, but you've got to read between the lines a little bit. And
a little bit.
The problem, the weakness of doing it this way, of doing Q&A forms, I can't do any follow-ups.
Right.
Right? Because there might be an answer, and just because I do this every day, I see an answer and I see something where I want more.
Right. Or you read the answer and you go, well, that was 3 paragraphs that had said not a thing at all in the overall scheme of things. And so we have to deal with it. So I think, one of the easy ways I think for people to do that is to take a look at the relative. So you provide this little prioritization chart for each of the candidates.
Yeah,
in the questionnaire.
each election cycle, I like to sit down and I talk to some people around the community as well, and I watch what's happening in the community to try to come up with 4 or 5 top issues that people are talking about in the community or the candidates are talking about, just to get their feel. So I ask for a ranking. What do you put as a top priority or in the middle or as a low priority on there? And this time around, what we listed in this matrix, the relationship between the board and the superintendent, communication between the board and its constituents, the district's facility plan, specifically concerning Lee Summit and Westview Elementary Schools. That's been a hot topic, as we've said. The district's bond issue and its plans for funding if it's passed, the board's role in curriculum, and the district's diversity initiatives and its response to federal immigration activities. Those are the 4 that we listed in the matrix, just to kind of, we kind of plucked from the ecosphere of conversations around town and asked them to rank those from lowest priority to top priority.
Right. And so I think one of the things, we talked about, like, everybody's in favor of teachers, everybody's in favor of the bond issue, everybody's in favor of, like, go Lee Summit R7 school district.
It should be noted, we also asked them to rank, with stars, right, up to 5 stars, how well, what do they think of the district as a whole?
Right.
2 said 5 and 2 said 4 stars.
Right. So I mean, like, wild-eyed, very angry pessimists gave it 4 stars, right, in the overall scheme of things. So I think that when you look at that, so you can think of that as, like, okay, so a month ago when we were talking about this, right, one of the conversations we had is, how are these people going to use their actual job in the school board, right? The job of the school board member is to do X, A, B, and C sort of primary things. What policies are they going to set? Are they going to push and put political capital or energy behind policies or budget decisions or whatever that are going to push in this one direction or another, right? So, just to take the top one out there as a thing. So I think one of the things you can do with these is say, okay, if this candidate thinks this is the top priority, and I think it's important, then you can ask them a question, find another piece of information to kind of follow up on it, or otherwise, or you may already kind of know what their position is on those sorts of things, and you can get an idea, okay, this is someone for whom I have alignment or disalignment with.
Which you hinted at it there in that last bit about asking them. Like, so if you see that your priority aligns, or maybe it doesn't, but you want to ask more about it, in each Q&A are links to their campaign websites or their Facebook pages. Go on there and ask. Get in there. I think it's important that if you have questions about those priorities, you should ask. And I think most of them have been responsive.
Right. And I think you're right. So I'll take the first one at the list, the relationship between the board and the superintendent. So one of the candidates listed it as their top priority.
Let's go ahead and say who they are.
Okay, so that was Michelle Dawson, listed that as their top priority. Nikki Nickens listed it as a very high priority. Jennifer Foley, I'm kind of doing this in like descending order, listed it as Jennifer Foley said is a high priority, and Leon Weatherby listed it as a moderate priority. So, if you were aggrieved or thought, approved of some of the turmoil that happened earlier this year with the superintendent's contract renewal, the will they, won't they, will she, won't, will he, won't he, sort of a little process that went along there, and the votes behind closed door. If you have a strong opinion on that, there's something that you can sort of differentiate upon in the overall scheme of things. And you can do this with a lot of these other ones that are out there.
And I think too, it should be noted that, like, the way I look at it now, and the way I worded it as just straight the relationship between, that can be interpreted several ways.
Right.
But that's something that we talked about last month, was one of the main roles of a board member, right? Mm-hmm. Is to work to hire that superintendent and set the mission,
right,
set the direction.
And so you may think that, and to be frank about this district's history, we do not have a glorious and shiny history of great relationships between the board and the superintendent over time.
At least in recent decades.
Right, in recent, which is the time frame that we're dealing with. And we have at least a hint at some of that same tension or friction between their coming this last year. And if that's something that you find, that you don't like or that you don't mind one way or another, if you are not a Dr. Buck fan and think that the board should have just not renewed his contract, then the people who maybe don't care about that relationship as much might be the thing. Or it may be someone that you think is a top priority who has it out for who really is anti-Dr. Buck and wants to run. And those aren't questions that are answered, but those are things you can get a little bit more information on as you go through that. So that's one way you can take this chart and just kind of look at how do they prioritize those things differently, and when deal with it. And I think another one you can do is the next question down is what is their, in that next question is there an issue not addressed above you think should be a priority? And all of them answered the question, although some of them
there were some very differences there.
But all four had different answers, right? One was focused on teacher pay, one was focused on communication between the board and the public. There was let's see, Michelle.
Let's get Nikki Nickens. Her first two words after that question were teacher pay.
Right.
And I think if you look at let's go to Leon's there and his first thing, which is interesting based on the matrix above, right? I think communication between the district and the public is an issue,
right? And so
he said communication between the board and the constituents was a very high priority,
right? So you can get a feel for there. Michelle Dawson was very concerned about the district's various sources of funding, specifically federal, state funding, dealing with that, obviously which is a timely, but also a very important topic. If there is going to be a lot of pushback at the federal level or push down at the federal level about federal funding for education programs, that's going to have a real impact at the state level, and wondering how you're going to manage that or find alternative streams or continue to access those streams. If the Trump administration decides to put some specific, string or, tie some very specific performances or what have you to that, are we going to tap dance to their tune, or are we going to stand ground, or are we going to need to, how is that all going to work?
Well, that affects policymaking.
Right. And that affects policymaking.
How do you change or adapt policies for the district to meet whatever the requirements,
right,
or changing pieces of funding that come from the federal and state levels.
Right. And so dealing with that is going to be an issue
or county level
that's out there. And I think Jennifer Foley's answer is about basically ongoing evaluation of academic programs and success and progress was her ongoing issue as well.
I think the question right after that is a big one for me. One of the things, Jason, when we used to do the interviews with candidates, I was always proud of the fact that we always brought up, listen, everybody says they want to support teachers. What does that actually mean? And I think our district, not unlike every other school district, especially in our state, and beyond, teacher stress is at an all-time higher and getting high and higher and higher. So I think it's an important question at a board level. From that dais, what can you do to support them?
Right. And so you can read those answers and you get a little bit of differentiation in their overall response. Everybody says we have to support teachers in their mental health needs, which great, but do they in their answers give any specifics about what they would want to do, or do they talk about policies that they can set or work with, what are things that may or may not appeal to you? And honestly, what are things, if they mention something, that you can hold these people accountable for when they're on the board?
Was there anything there, Jason, where you feel like you can differentiate approaches to that issue between those candidates?
I don't think there was anything. I mean, it's difficult to, I think, and maybe this is a reflection of the job of the board. And also I think at least for three of these four, they don't have a real visceral understanding of how the sausage gets made yet. I mean, you can't. I mean, this is not a criticism of you can't.
No, you and I have talked a lot about this over the years.
Right.
It's always interesting to watch new board members after the first year.
Right.
Because none of us know until you're there.
Right. And I will, and I'm not trying to take a shot at Jennifer Foley here, but her answer is almost absent of any real policy discussion, which it could be a reflection of how difficult this process is or how to do that at the board level. But realistically, the answer is if you do that, you're going to tell the superintendent to go do it and report back on how they're doing it. None of them say that directly, but that's the issue. And that may cost money. And then you make budget decisions to deal with that and you go through those sorts of processes. So it's, a lot of it is listening. A couple of them mentioned, I think they all actually talk about that, like listen to the teachers and allow them time to air their stresses and their issues so that they're on the record, if nothing else. And then you can go through and address those sorts of things going forward. And so, yeah, it's a good one, but check in and see what kind of what are the specifics? How do they think they're doing? Because they could be, they may have an utterly inflated idea of the power of the school board or the capacity of the school board to institute those sorts of change. Like they can't just by fiat say, do this. There's way more work to it than that as it goes through. So there's a lot of that, but it can help them, I think, express an understanding of how to actually do that job, but also what's their priority on those sorts of things.
And I think this is where I do actually miss doing the forums and the candidate interviews, because I read some of those and I want to be able to ask more. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I'm encouraging listeners to go ahead and make those questions, send those into their campaign pages, their Facebook pages, whatever. Ask those questions to really kind of dig in and learn more about their approaches.
Yeah, and as it turns out, remember, at these very, very local races, and you really can't get much more small and local than a school board.
Right.
Or at least around here. They don't have campaign staff. Okay. They may have somebody who watches their Facebook feed or watches the social media feeds that interact with as a whole. But in the end, the answers that you're going to get, if you're going to get an answer, are going to come from the candidate. If not immediately directly, a paraphrase of an answer that is actually given, ask the question, get an answer, and then somebody else types the answer. But that's about the biggest remove you're going to get. This is not a presidential campaign where you submit a question to, presidentialcandidate.com and it gets filtered through 3 AIs and 17 aides and message managers, and it comes back as absolute utter nothing.
And take advantage when those candidates are out knocking on doors. When they come to your house, take advantage of those few minutes.
Yeah.
And ask them questions. See who they are, see if they have similar approaches that you do to whether it's topics or even just to governance.
Right. As a whole. And feel free to follow up, because they're stuck there with you.
Right.
So you have them.
Now, I will say I did have one candidate knock on my door this past week. And it was a little weird. Because I want to ask questions, but then I feel like, well, look, I have lots of opportunities to ask questions.
Right.
Maybe this isn't the best place for me to
maybe cornering them for 45 minutes and grilling them on various other things was not didn't feel like that was the best use of the time.
Yeah, and especially if you had, you didn't read the roles of before you came in, and you might have been surprised that it was that you weren't prepared for someone like me to corner you and ask a lot of questions. So that was awkward. And look, knocking on doors is awkward for all of us anyway, right? Somebody does it, but I think that's what I love about local races is that you do get a chance to meet these people. So when somebody knocks on your door and they're running for office, talk to them a little bit, even if you think that they're not your side, right? Take a few minutes, because that's the great thing about local elections is parties and sides shouldn't really matter.
Right, and they do, even though they have grown to matter in terms of, I think, people making identifying with sets of candidates based on other partisan considerations. In the end, the issues that we're dealing with, I used to say this, and this doesn't apply as much anymore, but in the old days, you had this argument about the big government versus small government, and the conservatives or the Republicans or whatever at the time were all about we're going to push the power down. Right. We're going to give the decision-making power to the state and the local governments. Right. And we're going to, and this was the theory. Well, at the city level or at the school board level, there's no more local.
Doesn't get more local than
you
that.
have to, like, if that's the way this is going to work, you got to make those decisions right there.
And I think it's important, at least for me, and this is my opinion approach on it. I think it's important to know who they are, and to know their own personal levels of commitment and ability to understand the local issues and make policy decisions based on that commitment and understanding. And the reason I bring that up as a little bit is I've done a little reflection and thinking about local politicians that I've voted for. And it's funny, many of them, if you put us on a broad spectrum, I might not match up with them at state and national level things, but because I know who they are, because they're my neighbors, so to speak, right?
Right.
And I know their level, I know and understand their level of commitment and their ability to understand our issues and make the best decisions possible based on that.
Right. And the same, and
that's why it transcends to me our other fights that happen at the state and national levels.
Right. And you and I have been a little privileged in the, because we've done this podcast and we've, been really engaged in a lot of things, and we've gotten to actually meet and talk to, outside of campaign season, a lot of these people, and you learn a lot about their, how they approach a problem, even if you might not agree with the outcome or the end game of where they're going to, how they approach that problem. If you can think about them and they're thoughtful and they've gone through and they've actually thought about it, and then they give process to it, even if they come to a result that you may not necessarily agree with, you can, like, that knowledge of that happening is really, really important and carries a lot of weight.
Respecting their process and their approach, I think, does carry a lot of weight. That's a good phrase to use for this.
Yeah. But I mean, if they want to set the Stansbury Center on fire and dance around the death of the school district, maybe that's not, that may be a well thought out process, but it might be over the line for you.
Outside of my barbecue pit, I think fire's a bad option.
Probably so. But no, yeah, let me be clear. We are not advocating setting fire to anything, let alone
other than your barbecue pits.
Right. So
really, all this time off, Jason, and you forgot the rule of turning off your phone.
Well, kids need medicine regardless of what time it is.
I think that's a good look. I encourage people, go to the website. These have been the trending as the top stories on our site for the last several days. So go check out, take an opportunity to learn who these candidates are, see where you match up in policies and issues and approaches.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that do a little bit of homework. You've got this information in front of you, and if you have more questions, call them up, ask them.
Jason, you can tell everybody how you're voting?
Yeah, I'm going to vote for 2 board candidates, and I'm going to give this vote away. I'm going to go ahead and vote for the bond issue.
I just wanted to see if I could put you on the spot, just for the fun.
You got that. I'm going to vote for 2.
What's we're hoping for. The voter turnout is not expected to be high because there's not a lot on the ballot. It's just school district stuff, so that tends to draw turnout way down. Also, it's
LSR7 spring break, baby.
Spring break. So please, if you're here, if you're in town, go vote. If you're out of town, I really hope that you did absentee voting. That'll wrap us up for this week. We'll talk to everybody next time.